There'll be a website address, but I'm not going to give that over this microphone because it'll be too hard to do that. So hopefully we'll have a slide coming up here at some point and you'll be able to see that. But if you have questions, go ahead and text in during any of these sessions. Even during the session, if you want to text those in, you can certainly do that. And go ahead and text us any questions, or also go in from the website, the web address that will be up there in a moment. So I'm going to start out with a question, Jim, for you. And the question is, you had mentioned commissioning an army during your message, and I just want to ask you, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What does that mean to commission an army?
Is this on?
It should be, yeah.
Okay. Just like, can you hear me?
Omnidirectional.
Okay. Yeah, and actually that was part of my, as Tom aptly pointed out, that I missed my challenge part, which I do have, but which kind of ties into that. Commission, I think this might be a word to pastors. Certainly, leaders, and I tend to think we're all leaders, whether we realize it or not. But I think the idea is to understand that what we have is partnerships. Again, the callings are not necessarily occupational. That it may be, in some cases, but you could be a CEO of a company and be have a pastor gifting. You could be an evangelist, apostolic, whatever. And so I think that again, I think on any given Sunday, most Christians, which involves all of society, are church. And I think if we understand that this is partnership more than, it's a pastor's job for this or whatever, but it's kind of like we're all supposed to be, working together. We're just in different geographical locations because, we are meant to be the salt and the light and out there. And I believe that, there's Christian, born again Christians in every stream. And so, but I think that people need to understand that it's not another person's job. As Tom mentioned, and I think it was originally mentioned by Court, is that when you accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, you're born again, you carry the very presence of God. And so you are in ministry. I mean, it's 24/7 is what we do. And so I think that needs to get out there, and where, leaders need to articulate that and impart that, to their people, because, the army is in the pews in the churches on every Sunday. And so that this whole connection to Monday thing is kind of like more of a release, for the very presence of God into the marketplace, into the world. So, which would involve my challenge. My challenge would be to leaders is that one is to talk to the Lord and try to discern why you're in the geography you're in. I believe the Word says that He ordains our geography. He has, there's, by His allowance, there's a reason we're at where we're at. How are we mentoring that? What are we doing with that? And then to also, if you're in a leadership position or mentorship position over others, is to articulate that, to them as well, if they're Christians, that we all have that charge and that challenge.
Very good, thank you. Jim, are there any legal hurdles that prevent you from sharing the gospel at a corporate gathering, especially as a CEO of your company?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's I do it voluntary, and so as long as it's voluntary, and we don't force anybody to go, encourage, of course. I understand it's a little bit different, maybe because I kind of run the organization, so it's kind of a different thing. But if you make it voluntary, and so it's by their own choice they go, then I have no problems with that or issues. I suppose if you're in middle management or a different position, there's things you could do. I've seen it where that they've asked the owner of the company or the CEO, whatever, if they wouldn't mind if they could do just a voluntary session on faith and explain the advantages of that. It'll increase the attitude of the people, and there'll be better workers, better people. You won't have as many problems or issues, and give it a shot. Kind of give it like a trial, kind of thing. And if you see a positive, impact, then let's keep it going. And so I suppose you can operate that way.
Great. One of the other questions that came in, Jim, and I think this question is definitely going to be answered at some point during this, but I'm going to ask you anyway here, is are there any current events or networking opportunities to plug into your community?
I'm not sure.
And I assume what they mean by your community is, is there ways to plug in and see what's going on in your company and how to plug into that community of people around you to be part of that and see how that's operating?
Sure. I've actually had pastors that have come to some of our sales meetings just to check it out, what we do. We have a lot of dynamic young people. And so if that's what you mean, yeah, it's always open. We also have available positions open if that's what they mean. So anyway,
I also think that if you're, I'm not quite sure if you're looking for an answer of how to plug in and help join this community and become united. That's one of the things I know we'll be answering over the course of the next 2 days.
Are you talking about
like the next steps in terms of how we employ and get people into this force of being ministers on their workforce and how to come together in that. So.
Yeah, we as Tom mentioned, we have some follow-up that we're doing. We'd like to eventually be at a place, I think we will next year, kind of a next step, but create a situation, kind of some seminars that people could attend in conjunction with their church, but it would be out into the marketplace where if they attend so many of these seminars, so many hours, that they would get a marketplace ministry certificate that they could have the church. And I really think the multiplication is like if I'm a pastor and I'm looking at my members on a Sunday, I'm thinking like, wow, how many leaders do I have here? How many do I have here that are gifted here or here or here? I'm looking at them as a potential multiplication expansion, not just come and listen to my message on Sunday, and that's good and everything, but I'm thinking back, I want to find out who's who. I want to send them out, and so we were thinking that if we did this where we could issue with, the pastor, really would like the pastor to go too, because, we could, set on fire like a marketplace leader, CEO, whatever, and go back to church. And if the pastor isn't on board, like I said, it's got to be a partnership. But if they would agree that, we would issue a marketplace certificate under the HarvestNet umbrella, or Made to Flourish, we got a great partnership with Made to Flourish. We're working through some things. Then, that could be something hung up on the wall at the church. And then the pastor as a partner could use that person to train up other leaders as well. That'll reach areas that the pastor will probably never be able to get to, but his people can. And they're in areas that, again, that the pastor, they're busy, so they would not be able to reach those areas. So we see kind of an increased multiplication kind of thing.
Thank you. Steve, you're not getting off, by the way. Just to let you know. Okay, so here's a question for you, Steve. And kind of a difficult question, but the question is, your presentation was very good and rooted in Scripture, and one that most, if not all of us in this room would agree with. However, there are some parts of the evangelical world that may take a apologetic, maybe an angrily position of that the kingdom could in part be now and here now. So how would you respond to that? And then also, how do you think the religious landscape, how would that play into your discussion of the kingdom coming now, and how do we advance that kingdom in that understanding of the difference of opinions and beliefs?
Yeah, that's loaded.
The whole idea of an aspect of the kingdom being here and now has pretty much been broadly recognized by most evangelical, I have to underline, evangelical, Bible-believing theologians. So we talk about George Eldon Ladd has used the phrase, the already and not yet of the kingdom. And it's just using biblical language. Jesus talked about the kingdom is not yet, but then he says the kingdom is in your midst. So we have this tension we find within both the Gospels and the epistles of something of the kingdom being now, something of the kingdom being fully realized in the future. So sometimes we talk about the kingdom being inaugurated and the kingdom consummated. And virtually all forms of theology hold to that, other than, well, a tightly held classical dispensational view, which sees a very tight compartmentalization of God's dealings with his people. And so they would view the times of the Old Testament under the Mosaic law as being a certain way that God dispensed his dealings with people, and it's totally different than what he does in the church age, and it's totally different than what he does in the millennial kingdom age, and these are tight and compartmentalized. So they would say the church age has nothing to do with the kingdom. The kingdom is totally future. There are still theologians, and they have, alphabet soup after their name, and they still hold on to that, and they can make a case for that. And just because a majority disagrees with them doesn't mean that they're wrong. But it seems like the weight of understanding is that the kingdom has come now and will be fully realized in the future. Part of the reaction against this, and where the idea of no, the kingdom isn't now, is because the way we've thought about the kingdom in sort of a Constantinian mode of we're going to kind of take the Old Testament aspects and have kings enforcing religious law, and so you had that during the Middle Ages, and even after the time of the Reformation, you had certain countries. So you had Holland, which was Reformed, and France, which remained Catholic, and Northern Germany, which was Lutheran. But that was the state church, and if you're in that region, then you're going to be a good Lutheran, or if you're in Poland, you're going to be a good Catholic. If you're in Greece, you're going to be a good Eastern Orthodox. And so kingdom and church and government got kind of all melded together. So John Nelson Darby, certainly the father of dispensationalism, and those that followed his trail, were rightly reacting against that. So they're saying, no, the kingdom is not now. Well, no, it's not that kind of a kingdom, a Constantinian kingdom with the sword, but in the sense of the kingdom that Jesus came to inaugurate and invites us into, a kingdom of word, deed, and power that is spreading. It's been inaugurated and will come to a fruition, will come to a consummation. We are invited to that kingdom.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Sure.
I think it says in the word that the kingdom is within us, like the kingdom of God is in us. So, like I was talking about, it used to, the presence of God was in the temple, but now that all changed, so the kingdom is advancing, and, the word says it's in us. So, so I think it's one part of it,
Steve, also for you, just to ask and kind of go on to the second question, that next question is, how do you see a unification of a coordinated process of attacking these marketplaces and these kingdoms, if you will, that is coming together of the churches today? Is there, and quite honestly, is there a coordinated effort that you know of today?
Well, I would say what is happening in the West is we have enjoyed living in what has been called Christendom. It was just kind of assumed if you're born in the West, you're living in a Judeo-Christian culture. There's been centuries of Christianity that has affected those various areas, and none of them being by any means perfect, far from it. But nonetheless, you can't deny the fact that most of the countries of Europe, of course England, and the sun never set on the British flag, so where the British colonies went, to a great degree, there was Christianization going on. In other words, Christian ideas coming into them, and in some places where those, if I could use the big word, presuppositions, worldview that, in other words, there's a God and there's moral order. I mean, just that simple statement, we know in our secular world that is denied by the vast majority of the intelligentsia. Just those two. We won't even get into the triune God, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus, just kind of God and order. Well, according to evolutionary Big Bang, all you got matter and energy, chaos, and everything is chaos. There's no meaning, no purpose, no free will. And where's this? What's the telos? Where's this going? In 100 billion years, you meet maximum entropy, heat death. All particles in the universe are equidistant apart, and all you're left with is an eternal dial tone going out into infinity. Be of good cheer. So we wonder why the suicide rate is so high. And so we in the West have just lived with God, law, love your neighbor. That's human rights. Where do human rights come from? It's Judeo-Christian concept of made in the image of God, all that. We could take that for granted. And therefore, when you went into law, when you went into medicine, when you went into business, when you went into teaching, all you had to do was learn the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the other two sides. And that's all you had to learn in math or whatever you're learning. Now you need to understand that there is Marxist law, and there is secular evolutionary law, and there's Islamic law. And so now you need to be thinking about, if you've been called to the legal arena, what does it mean to be a Christian? And how am I, and even though I can't jam down the throat of the broader polis, I can't jam down their throat my particular views, nonetheless, I as a Christian have to operate from a Christian worldview. I have to put on Christian spectacles, and of course there's a place to study the Bible, but then we need to take the Bible and turn its light onto the creation in whatever domain we're called into. And so to do law Christianly, to do medicine Christianly. And of course we had Nazi medicine with brilliant people that were very skilled surgeons that were sewing human beings together to kind of make them look like Siamese twins. Somehow that doesn't sound like good medicine. But who are you to say? Who are you to judge? We have students in our classrooms. One teacher, I just read 10 years, this is 10 years ago, this teacher was lamenting that in his classrooms, he would try to make a case about the Nazis being, and their program of genocide was intrinsically wrong, and 20% of his students could not bring themselves to say that what they did was wrong. They would say, I personally wouldn't do that, but who am I to judge? So we are now at the place we do not have the luxury of living in a Judeo-Christian Christendom culture. We need to be, as never before, self-consciously thinking about what does it mean to be doing law Christian. So what we've had for centuries here is little pastor boys going to seminary and being taught how to preach, how to counsel, etc. Okay, but we've not done that with the people in the other domains, because we didn't really think we had to train doctors. Since we lived in a Christian nation, most of the doctors were not performing abortions, and fill in all the other blanks. Now, every single domain needs to be infused with a Christian worldview, and we're still fumbling to try to figure out how to do that. That's why we're kind of looking at this seminar. Well, hey, maybe we could go to some businesses and see how this is done. There are, specifically to the question, that was all prelude. We do have the Christian Legal Society. We do have the Christian Medical and Dental Association. We have various national organizations that are speaking to these issues at a high level. But we need to have this in every Middlesex village and farm. We need to have local experts that are modeling this for us. And frankly, when it comes to the business world, we need to see living demonstrations. And I've been just so blown away hearing the stories from Jim. I mean, how many pastors, and I know we only have a few pastors here, but how many pastors here are having one salvation a week? I ain't having that. My goodness. And so it's a new day. It's a new day. Every single one of us are called to be points of light, places of salt and light. You are the tip of the spear of the kingdom wherever you've been called. And it's not all about you're building my little kingdom and I'm figuring out new ways to get you to come to my church, and we're having visitation Sunday, and if we can break records, I'll have a pie thrown in my face and maybe we can get more people to come. Those days are just so long. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, see me after class. But I mean, those days are long gone. We need to be out in every area of the marketplace bringing the life and the word of Jesus. And we need this modeled for us.
I appreciate all your questions, and they're coming in fast and furious, but we only have a few more minutes, and so I'm going to ask a 10-part question to Jim and a 10-part question to Steve. No, I'm kidding. But for Jim, I think I can wrap up some of these questions together and just ask you this. Has there been a time that has your faith and your openness of your faith on your job has hurt your business? And if so, how?
Oh, that's good.
And then secondary to that question is, do you disciple those that come to Christ? And if so, how do you disciple them? And does that include actually sending them to a church and encouraging them to attend church? And how do you just kind of handle that process of these that you're working with in the business world today?
Right. Yeah, that's first. Look, there's always detractors. You know, always what's it called on Facebook? Haters. You know, so you're going to have that, especially when you're in the battle. You know, and you just have to understand it and not let it offend you. And we're actually dead people. We can't be offended, right? That's the way it works. But what I found and what I do, when you have as many young people as we have, a lot of kind of in some respect like a fatherless, generation, and so a lot of them have not been taught by men and are not. Godly family situations. So, but what I found, if I'm just looking from a business standpoint, I deal with issues all the time. Less issues, the better, right? So I figure if I could fix foundations, in people, and rather than just treat the symptoms of, bad behavior, if I could fix their foundation, then I'm gonna have a much better person, more productive, better attitude, less issues, less problems. And so I find it's been very positive for the business. And so it's interesting to me how hungry young people are for truth and for right paths. I often say, look, I'm just a road sign. I'm just going to point you in the right direction. Whether you take that way or not, it's up to you. But the idea is that they don't have the right directions. And so what we're able to do is when we treat, we call it mind, body, spirit, MBS, when we treat the whole person, which we do in our organization, so we talk to them about health and their habits and about pouring into themselves and then about the spiritual. And so we try to treat the whole person. So when the whole person is well, you get good results, you get fruit. Our leaders, we challenge them to read Proverbs. What's better than wisdom, right? They're out there in the world dealing with people. And so we'll have them, we'll challenge them, take a month, 31-day month. There's 31 chapters of Proverbs. Read a chapter every day. And I know in that, that they're going to be wiser for it. They're going to be better people. And wisdom is key when you're dealing with people, knowing what to do, when to do, what to say, not to say, all that kind of stuff. So, so that works very positive for what we do. And I would just happen to see, I just want to make a point, I happen to see Steve Erickson out there too, and somebody mentioned about, well, what if you're not the CEO or the owner? Steve worked for an international corporation, Parker Hannifin. And Steve was not the owner. You probably wish you were, but you're not. But you've been able to impact the whole of that company because of who you are, what the Lord poured into you, and so you got elevated, in your position, because of your belief and understanding that God will work through you. There's a reason you're there, and He's given you incredible things. You'll probably talk about it. I think you're talking tomorrow, whatever. But so whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, the Lord, Psalms say, promotion doesn't come from the east, west, or the south, but the Lord lifts up one and puts down another. So wherever you're at, understand that the Lord is all about growth and elevation and putting you in a place of influence. And so you just need to take on that mantle, and God will do amazing things, wherever you're at, whatever position you're in. And, if you don't like the position you're in, I mean, you're in there for a reason. I mean, God is the elevator, so he'll put you in another position, but he's got to be able to trust you and trust your heart and your integrity, trustworthy in a little, and, you get more, right? So I'm not sure I got off on a path. Was that the question?
Yeah. Just to add to that question for just a short answer, or however you want to take this, but how do you, when you had mentioned culture and
Right.
how the larger corporation takes leaders from your organization into there because of the culture that you have been building that, can you speak just a little bit more to that culture and what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about it. It's mind, body, spirit. It's caring about the whole person. And, when people come to us, they kind of, in the beginning, kind of marry us for our money, so to speak. I mean, you see the profitability and all that. And everybody aspires to do better, do more, and become wealthy and that. But I think we understand that when they walk in our door, they're going to get a lot more than what their expectations are. And when they see in us what they don't see in the world, it changes everything. They want to be part of that culture. And so I think I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and just wants to just wants to mess up their life. They all want better. They all want more. They all want to aspire to be better people. And when they see that in practical application actually happening, I think you all know, I mean, I do. I mean, I learn by people's good behavior and their bad behavior. I see somebody, they say, man, I want to be just like that. I want to be like Steve and talk like him, So, but, also you learn by people's bad behavior. It's like, man, I'm never going to be that way, And so when they come in our organization and our leadership is so dynamic and so loyal and teachable and, want to be better people, then the people that come in under that kind of umbrella, then they desire the same. I think most people do want to be good people, want to be better people, want to impart and influence others in a positive way. I think that's just inherent. I think you got to breathe that in us. So we kind of bring that out,
That's very good. Thank you. Steve, kind of a two-part question for you also. The first one is, you talked about the 12 pieces of the pie, right? And 11 out of those 12 are, his perfect idea of society. But then there's this 1/12 of that, right? The priest that are here to support that other portion of that 11 out of the other 11 sides. So how do you see how do you see pastors or those that are in that field? How do we have endeavors to support this successfully today in the church?
Okay. Well, first of all, I did not have, of the 12, I did not have one slice being priests.
Right.
So, sometimes it is in discussions, people will, that's the religious aspect of my life. The pie chart's representing all of creation, all the various activities we could be doing. And the simplest way to think about the Church of Jesus Christ, it is the called out assembly, the ecclesia, right? And Paul says in Corinthians, so when you have all come together in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, when you come together, believers, you're a church. You can come together as the church. You could be meeting in a home, in a cave, in a crystal cathedral, but you're coming together to worship God, build one another up, encouraging testimony, partake of the Lord's Supper. You're doing some things, and there's a multiplicity of ways that might be done. You might use leavened or unleavened bread, but you're gathered, and then you're scattered. Gathered, scattered. And there's to be a regularity to that. And these ones who gather have all sorts of different giftings. And there's guys that are tent makers. They're just a tent maker. What happens to be an apostle? Paul. Zenos is sent. Oh, he's a lawyer, but he's sent. Luke, physician, but he's on mission. So we gather and we scatter. And so Now, this gathering place, though, in the pages of the New Testament, we do find certain ones appointed to oversee this gathering, because even when you're scattered, there's still people that are caring for you, and we all need care. I'm a pastor, but I need people to care for me, right? So even when you're scattered and you're doing your work, whatever, everyone needs care. So these people who gather, there should be those who are older in the faith, knowledgeable in the Bible, and are caring for the things of this gathering and these who identify as Christians, and they should be energizing them and equipping them and envisioning them then to go out and be the salt and light. But as we go out, it's not like there's one priestcraft per se, or one slice that's only the priest. We're all a kingdom of priests. We have different functions. Some of us function a little bit more focused on this thing when we gather together, which, by the way, just to throw this gig together, people were here. Just let me hear some of that rock and roll. I rebuke that old man. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, that was good. You and I have had, I like the singing better, though. You might have another gig there. Steve, you and I have had these conversations over breakfast, but, the question was asked, and I think it's a good question. Do you see the marketplace ministry model as a primary method to keep the American church alive today because of the downfall of the church? We know the numbers as we look at the church. Churches are seeming to be in decline. Do you see this marketplace ministry model as a primary method to, quote unquote, save the church?
Well, Jesus is the Savior of the church. He is constantly working and building his church, and all through church history, it is morphing and taking various shapes. And some of that has to do with, just as Jesus in his incarnation comes, he came as a man, and that I mean male, and he came as a Jewish man, male, and he came in the clothing and form of first century Judaism and living in the land of Israel. He came in that form. So he incarnated into a culture, but what he was sharing and modeling transcended that. As the gospel goes in various places, it does incarnate, but it doesn't just copy everything that's in the culture, because there's some things in the culture that are bad. So it takes that which is good of that original creation. And again, God, my understanding is that there's initially one man and one woman, and from them every nation of heaven came, and all the alleles and all the chromosomes and everything you need, from pasty white to inky black and every form of melanin in between, and very hot, very tall people to very low, and all that, and stocky, Northern Europeans to skinny, all of that is wrapped up in the genome, and you can have all this refracted out, and that was God's intention, because God likes diversity. This represents the variegated grace of the living God. And so the gospel is going to be incarnated in various communities and various nations in a certain way, but it will also in other ways be standing against some of the practices of a given nation, and it'll have a prophetic role in standing against those. So, and we've seen that through church history and through missions. And as you go through even church history, the various centuries, you've got the monasteries preserving the gospel. Was that the ideal? Kind of pulling away, maybe not necessarily, but it was necessary. It was not the ideal that Jesus had, but it preserved the gospel. State churches, they were moving in the light they had at the time, and I'm talking about in the time of the Protestant Reformation. But we've seen morphing, and now we're seeing fresh morphing. But I believe it's moving us in the direction of what God intended for the ecclesia. So 21st century is frankly very much like now the first century, where Christians throughout the world, including the West, I'm talking about true born-again spirit-filled Christians, are the minority. And we're living in increasingly hostile cultures. And so this is just, it's not a cure-all to, if you say, save the existing church as it is. No, the existing church, we've all got to be morphing into what the Lord has for us. So this is the whole thing of being a flexible wineskin, but we're not talking about being a Pinocchio wax nose or something, and you just make a Jesus of your own image. But there's a certain place of form and freedom, and we need to be hearing what the Spirit is saying to the churches in this hour. And so this marketplace ministry, people thinking self-consciously, I am called, I have a vocation. Whatever I do, I am to do to the glory of God, and I can no longer assume that what I was taught, and I'm saying even if you worked on the factory line, while the union and all the people around you are kind of, hey, don't work so hard, we don't want to knock ourselves out. Is that really, whatever your hand finds to do with all of your might? It doesn't matter where you are, corporate America, white collar, blue collar, there's always pressures to conform in an ungodly way. And we need to be self-consciously thinking about every single place we are we glorifying the Lord? Are our lives lining up spirit, soul, and body with His Word and the Spirit? So,
Can I add to that? I think there's a transitioning time that not all, but there's the small C church. There's Cap C, which is what Jesus brought. One church. I think that sometimes we see churches in the Old Testament style, and I mean I'd rather churches be more like teaching centers, like sending out centers, rather than maybe kind of an old model of just you go there Sunday and you get a sermon and we worship a bit together. That's all good, but I think that it needs to change and understand what's happening now in the culture. That again, this army, all these people that have the very Spirit of God that dwells within them, to the more gathering places and teaching centers and sending out, versus kind of the old model. I think we need to transition somewhat, and it's a thought process that
where are we at with time?
We're good. We're done.
All right. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.